In this video I want to discuss not just who I think is the best boss I have so far encountered, but also what makes an amazing boss. I have for years now neurotically ranked bosses from various games, usually Souls-likes and lights, and other games that just have stellar bosses. And I had no doubts that Messmer the Impaler would surely be the boss fight of the year 2024. That's no longer the case. Now he's not even number 2. That happened when just moments ago I finished my Wukong boss ranking where, to put it lightly, I glazed all over my favorite boss of that game, Erlang the Sacred Divinity. In that video I made the bold claim that he's the best boss I have ever fought. And you know what? I think I'm absolutely right. Now whether he's my favorite boss or not, we're gonna get to later. I also gave nearly the same levels of praise to the Great Sage's Broken Shell, the final boss of Wukong, which is now my second favorite boss of this year. So what does Erlang do so well to be potentially the best boss of all time? Well, let me do my best to explain in more detail than the time I had in my Wukong boss ranking. I will simultaneously highlight different aspects of what I think make a great boss in general, while drawing comparisons from other games I've played. So let's begin with our first aspect in making a great boss. So what's the first thing people look for in good bosses? I think for the average gamer, the most surface level aspects come first for a lot. Is it cool? Is it memorable? Is it fun? Using the Soul series as an example, people have always gravitated towards the best presented bosses like Ludwig, Gael, and even to this day with the likes of Midra. I don't think these are terribly complex bosses in terms of how their mechanics are designed, but who cares? They're cool and fun. So what chance does Erlang stand against their likes? I definitely can't say he's immediately more visually striking than those, and his music, while good, does pale in comparison. Although there is a giant kaiju fight that comes right after your duel against his human form, so that has all the spectacle you could ever want. But my favorite fight is specifically his human form, so that's what I'm gonna focus on. He does have pretty solid visuals on his own, and I like the music putting extra emphasis on his dramatic face changes.
Have some of his spark. That's it. I won't hold back from now. Let's fight! Let me see when power diverges from his.
But mostly his coolness comes from his demeanor and his interactions with you, which are beyond anything I've ever seen in a game. In Wukong you can transform into other enemies and bosses you've defeated, and it's usually kind of a free damage button and rarely do bosses have any reaction to them. Erlang, however, has a unique reaction to all of them from what I've tested, commenting on your choice and also transforming himself into a tiger or a bird. Or if you turn into a rock, he doesn't feel the need to transform and just stands back and lectures you, which is funny. If he does transform, he follows it up with a charge attack, and if it lands, it will knock you out of your transformation. So for once, there's a risk to this mechanic. But if you dodge the charge, you've earned your transformation and can keep it. He can respond to your other spells as well, like throwing your immobilization right back at you, do laser sweeps to deal with your clones, and even absorb your elemental damage and turn it against you. I don't think I ever in my life would have discovered this on my own, it was only thanks to comments that I found out about it. But it's such a cool detail. These are a great function in gameplay, but I'm pointing them out just to talk about his coolness factor for now. Other than that, I like how he can change the size and even quantity of his weapons. It's kind of like Morgoth's, but even better. That being said, nothing in this fight comes close to reaching the level of chills I got from seeing Ludwig's face transition cutscene the first time. So I'd say the surface level stuff is definitely done better by FromSoft, but if you want depth and complexity, whoo boy, are they behind in comparison. So let's talk about the best aspect of the Sacred Divinity, his endless complexity. Now first of all, who gives a fuck about complexity? Like I said, I think the average gamer cares more about the presentation, and that's totally fine. There's a reason Lu Bu is better regarded than Guan Yu, despite Guan Yu being straight up an upgraded version of Lu Bu's fight mechanically. But he's not as cool, so people don't really care. But some people want challenge, some want adrenaline-fueled fights, and battles where you have to do more than just memorize the handful of attacks the boss has. I can enjoy a simple fight from time to time, but what I really look for in boss fights is depth in how you have to approach them, and how they challenge your ability to react, adapt, and position yourself. Not because I hate myself and want my balls busted, even though that's sometimes true, but because it makes me engaged in the fight. And Erlang is extremely engaging to me. First of all, even hitting this boss is not going to be easy. Keep in mind all the previously mentioned reaction counters he has, but on top of them, at his neutral he will constantly block and parry you if you keep pressing on, as well as dodge your heavy attacks. If he does parry you, he can do an unavoidable grab, but it doesn't do damage to you, and instead just gives Erlang the turn to attack. So what is the point of this guard mechanic? I think these are in some ways a disguised breather for the player. When he starts blocking you, you are safe from any damage until he's parried you, then he's back on the offense. But during that time you can build up some focus that you can use for heavy attacks, damage his guard, and again, most importantly, catch your breath. Personally, I'm a little bit mixed on this because of its effect on his pacing, but we'll talk about that a little later. You can avoid it by limiting how much you press on him, as well as using spirit attacks, which are brief transformations that usually let you do one attack. The most efficient way to do damage to him is to hit him during his combos, recovery animations, using immobilization when he's locked into an action, or using the brief window when he's in the process of throwing it back at you to land a heavy attack. Or my favorite method, jumping over his attacks to dodge and landing with a heavy attack to punish. I think that's another thing that ensures you can have endless amounts of fun with the boss, giving the player more ways to avoid attacks than just one. Which brings me to the main point of this category of whatever I called it, making use of the combat system, because I believe that's what a great boss should do. Erlang doesn't nullify these mechanics and instead works dynamically with them and encourages you to be smart about how you use them. You can tell a boss is perfect in the game it's at if moving it into a different game with a different combat system would drastically take away from it. There are bosses in Wukong that I think would have been just as good in other games as in Wukong, sometimes probably even better, and those bosses are usually not very good. Also, I don't want to make a whole chapter for this, but I guess it has to be mentioned. Balance and fairness. This isn't something anyone can make a very objective argument for, and everyone has a different tolerance level for what they think is balanced or fair. Personally, I do want the boss to have enough health not to die in under 1 minute, but also not last over an hour with no checkpoints. Not one-shot me with every single attack, but also not tickle me with a feather. And have fairly readable animations. Some memorization in unreadable animations is fine, as long as it doesn't go overboard and the majority of the attacks are like that. The Sacred Divinity was really difficult for me, but not unreasonable. But I want to talk about my absolute favorite aspect of Erlang and his complexity, which is just how well he adjusts and reacts to the player. Not just the spells, transformations and dodges I mentioned, but his attacks that he can alter on the fly in reaction to where you are and what you're doing. Try getting away during his combos and he can do a number of chasing attacks. Try getting close when he assumes a stance from a distance and you might just walk into a trap. Do a heavy attack when he's just started his own move and he can alter that into a dodge and counter attack, and then seamlessly go back to other combos from that. And then the combo he transitions into is random. You can just never guess what this guy's gonna do. God damn. Then if you get too aggressive with spells and stuns, he can shout and do an uninterruptible counterattack to put a stop to it. And before you think you can use these reactions against him, that's not the case. He doesn't always do the same move in reaction. Even his uninterruptible attack he does to counter a stun lock has at least 3 different versions from what I've seen. Now I'm a big combo mix-up enjoyer, and I think it's one of the most overlooked aspects in boss design. Obviously depends a bit on the game, I don't think Cuphead needs them, though even there RNG is a massive proponent. But tell me, which boss do you think is better? A boss that can do this, or a boss that can do this? Assuming both are designed to be fair, of course. Not a single extra move added, yet you've doubled or tripled the amount of interactions with the boss. Obviously this is a very simple example, but you can make this one line as long as you want, but it will always be horizontal. In that case, it's a moveset with a lot of quantity, but not depth. Those individual moves might be if they're really demanding, and even more so if they can overlap in some way. So it's not that every boss needs a massive combo chart, but I find there needs to be something to incentivize more than just memorizing the attacks they have lined up horizontally. I jokingly made a similar chart for Erlang, but honestly, I don't think I would physically be able to make a real one for him. He does have some entirely scripted sequences, but outside of those, he can seemingly invent his own combos on the fly. So how is it fair for the player if there's no guarantee in his moveset? because there are bad mix-ups. If, for example, a certain branch requires you to either preemptively dodge or delay just a beat. Enough that the preemptive dodge will be punished with the delay, but then the instant attack will punish you if you don't immediately dodge. That would be bullshit. Erlang does have some points where you need to do a preemptive dodge. Particularly his sudden backslide slash has gotten some people riled up when it can come so fast it's nigh unreactable. But the thing I like about it is that it only comes at certain points. There are very obvious combo finishing moves you learn in phase 1 and 2, like lightning slams, after which he can pull that trick. At that point you don't need to read what the animation is. If he moves an inch in a sudden motion after these finishers, just dodge. It's either the backslide slash or another attack that is also instant, with the same exact dodge timing. And if it's not and it's a delayed one, you will have enough time to dodge that. Might take trial and error once or twice, and if that's a deal breaker for you, then this boss and countless Souls bosses, and bosses in general, are also off the table. Trial and error exists, and how better to learn than from mistakes. It just depends how frustrating it is and if it wastes your time. This attack barely does any damage, so on its own it will not cause a reset anyway. Another point where he can do this backslide and a number of other variations is in the middle of combos, which may seem indefensible when it's unreactable. Yet, I have noted that the times when he does them is in the same timing as the standard path of that combo that's established in phase 1 or 2. So if you have the timing down for the standard combo, you will unknowingly dodge the variation, and the attack you actually have to react differently to is the move after that. And this applies to all of his mix-ups. They're either the same timing you're used to, or they're slow enough to be reactable. Let's see what kind of timings we have here. Slow, slow, and even slower, and then he does a quick poke. Then another version, slow, slow, and even slower, but it's a different attack, and then he does something else. I didn't know he would do that, but I still dodged it. And when he can do multiple of these mix-ups in the same continuous combo, I don't even really process what he's doing. But each move is already in my muscle memory, so it doesn't even matter. I can dodge all of it if I'm just focused. I've never seen it done like this before, but it's absolutely genius. If you have an understanding of his base moveset, which you can practice in phase 1 and 2, you will be well equipped going forward. To use FromSoft Souls-likes as an example, I think they have a pretty good grasp on combo mix-ups and distance-based alterations in their newer games, though I find Elden Ring has a slight tendency to make the bosses use giant weapons and explosions to make up for the lack of distance reaction moves. And sometimes when they do have them, like Malekith, their chasing attacks is always the same, so you can abuse their AI. Again, something you can't do to Erlang. It is just up to preference, of course. Big weapons and explosions do fill the same role. I just find it more impressive when they have precise footwork. That being said, Godfrey, or rather Horalu, is probably the boss that's closest to having as many mix-ups as him, followed by the Great Sage and Guan Yu. A thing worth mentioning, even though it's so niche it doesn't really fit into any of my talking points, attacks you dodge based on sound cue. This boss has them with the dogs. When they bark, you dodge. That's kinda cool. Another key aspect in cooking great fights: positioning, timing, and momentum. You don't want to just stand in front of a boss and parry or dodge everything the same way, or you have yourself a Lies of P boss. As big of a fan of Guan Yu as I am, he too is guilty of this. Parry-focused games in general struggle a fair bit in this respect. Sekiro found some ways around it with stuff you couldn't parry or dodge and had to get out of, as well as the bosses themselves being very agile. Erlang, of course, knocks it out of the park. His axe slams create AoEs that will hit you if you don't either jump up in a direction where the axe itself doesn't touch you, plus you need to land inside the AoE ring he's created, or you dodge away and then right back through the ring. But that's only possible if you can create enough distance with that first dodge. He also has a number of combos that have successive strikes that come too fast for you to normally dodge each, so creating distance or circling around him helps. However, you can substitute good positioning with perfect timing, since last possible frame dodging gives you more invincibility frames and shorter dodge cooldowns. I find for some moves like the axe slams, it's just easier to jump, or to dodge away and then back in, than to perfect dodge. So even with that mechanic in mind, I do a lot of directional dodging. Then considering his distance and position-based alterations, you do always have to keep in mind where you're going. Sometimes I want to bait him into doing certain actions. I also like how much Erlang moves around, not just by dashing away, but also his combos having a lot of forward momentum. So he does a fantastic job in this aspect. Contrasting to some of my other favorite fights, they tend to be very mobile, and if they aren't, at least directional dodging or precise timing is there to demand your attention. Slave Knight Gael with his cloak is kind of a good example, though I would be lying if I said the main reason I love him isn't just how cool the fight is. Think about some of your favorites and how they fare in regards to positioning, timing and momentum. And finally, the quality that's hardest to put into a box, but you know when you have it and when you don't. Flow and pacing. There are some fights that just feel like an endless dance and you can easily lose track of time because it's just non-stop fun. I think Messmer Phase 2 is perfect flow-wise, because even though he does give you lots of room to breathe, he does them while still doing something. He doesn't stop to stare you down, but rather those pauses are him transforming into a snake, or back to, I guess, human? I don't know if that really qualifies. I think FromSoft is really good in general when it comes to pacing and flow, and have gotten better over time. But what about fights with very intentional pauses in between each phase? I would say Crosshair in Resident Evil 4 Remake is perfectly paced, despite its segmented presentation. I'm not sure I can explain exactly what it is, but going from brutal knife duels to quietly intense cat and mouse games, before back to explosive action was done perfectly in my opinion. What about back and forth style duels where, like in Erlang's fight, sometimes you get to be on the offense and the boss on the defense? Well, look no further than Sekiro with the likes of Owl and Isshin, who are no less exciting when they're doing the blocking and deflecting. I think it helps how quickly your roles shift and there isn't a jarring break in between the role switch. Whereas in Erlang's fight, unfortunately, there often is. And that's my problem with his guard. If he just parried you and went on the offense, that would be great, but the unavoidable grabs make the transition a little slow, and whenever he does it, it is a bit of a dip in my enjoyment compared to when he's doing his crazy combos. On top of some moves like the Storm of Swords being slight pace killers. Along with the pacing, I think another flaw worth mentioning is his iframe ignoring slash. It's possible to dodge with good positioning and perfect timing, but it shouldn't be able to hit you during a normal roll. That's a bug, and it's bullshit. Another thing I would change is the 3-phase structure. As is, the first two act as training for the final one, and I'd rather they just merge those first two into one. Alternatively, you could just make phase 1 flow into phase 2 seamlessly. I think only one of these big dramatic phase changes was necessary. Keep the axe one, that one is cool. How big are these problems though? Well, not enough for me to change my mind that he is simply the best boss I have ever seen, but it brings me to question if he's my favorite or not. I don't think a flawless boss means it's the best, most perfect. It's about how many positives there are, and how much the negatives take away from that. And in Erlang's case, there's more than like 10 other good bosses put together. So who are his biggest competitors? Well, one of them comes straight from the same game, the Great Sage himself. He doesn't suffer at all from this pacing issue, and he shares many of his positives. Though with his staff being so long, he doesn't really need many distance-based adjustments, and so he doesn't have many. But that does also mean that there's a little bit less emphasis on positioning. Inner Father from Sekiro is another one that's hard to put beneath Erlang, but also again, positioning isn't quite as important. But the number one competitor with all the position checks in the world is Allmind from Armored Core 6. Far less complex in terms of the amount of interactions the boss has with you, but goddamn do I love every second of it. Well, outside of phase 1. But Armored Core 6 has so much going for its more demanding bosses, thanks to the wonderful 3D movement that gives you so many ways to dodge the same attacks, and the way you have to sort of mirror the enemy's movement so you can better strafe their rapid fire. Many bosses like Allmind have very precise tracking in their attacks, and you aren't given iframes in your dodges, so how you dodge attacks is entirely hinging on your movement, as well as timing. And also your build, because different kinds of mechs move differently, and their speed, jump height, etc. depends on the parts you equip and how much your machine weighs. There's a different kind of satisfaction in seeing the build you have made work wonders. On top of that, I appreciate this boss on a story and thematic level. Armored Core 6, thematically, is all about humanity's free will to make choices, and Allmind, while having a noble goal, is in direct opposition to that. And she has allied herself with Iguazu, who we have beaten countless times throughout the game, who has grown a massive grudge on us, not only for his humiliation, but also his jealousy because he feels he doesn't have the freedom that he thinks we, the player, do. And yet, in his rage, he manages to take a hold of this machine with nothing but pure hatred, foiling Allmind's plans. That is the neat wrapping on this gift of a boss, something I can't say I really resonated with when it comes to Erlang. As much as I talk about complexity, I'm not at all immune to presentation elevating the boss for me. If Erlang's story was as meaningful, or if he had music from Stellar Blade blasting the entire time, who knows, maybe this wouldn't even be a question and he would be the obvious favorite for me. I think purely enjoyment-wise, my heart belongs to the peaks of Armored Core 6. I love Allmind, I love Ibis series mech, I love Balteus and Snail Balteus, as well as Air and even some of the less important bosses like Cataphract and Enforcer. Doing each of these multiple times no damage made me learn their ins and outs instead of just mowing them down with overpowered builds, and goddamn are they good. And goddamn do their arenas suck. So I think the answer is, Erlang is probably not my favorite boss, but there's no doubt he is the best boss. I think Allmind remains as my favorite, but even I can admit Erlang is a better made boss. That could certainly change over time. But let me know who are your favorite fights, and just out of curiosity, how well they fare in each of these categories I talked about. Presentation, complexity, mobility, and pacing. I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching it.